and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Brittany and this is my channel, The Little Lightworker. Today I'm going to be sharing my story about chronic pain, how that showed up in my life and how that was directly affected to my trauma. Now, I do want to put a disclaimer out there. I will briefly be touching on the subject of abuse. So if that is a triggering topic for you, I advise you to use your own discretion of whether this is something that you want to tune into or not. So with that being said, I am very nervous and very emotional to share this particular story, but it's really been sitting on my shoulder, and when something sits on my shoulder, that's a prompt for me from spirit that it needs to be expressed and manifested. And my intention with sharing this is maybe someone out there will relate, or if not, this will just give you a story and a perspective that maybe you didn't have before. So I started dealing with chronic pain when I was about 18, 19 years old. Prior to that, I had been a very, very healthy kid. I rarely ever got sick. My whole childhood, I was really sick a handful of times. Even so, to the point where I had perfect attendance because I just never missed school because I was just always really healthy. I ended up getting pretty sick with bronchitis when I was 18. And it took me 3 months to get over. By that point, the doctor I saw figured it may have been pneumonia, but ever since then, I felt off, and I just found myself going back to the doctor. Something just didn't feel right with me. I never felt like my immune system really was the same after getting sick for that long. And a bunch of tests were done, and most of them were normal, except there were some few irregularities with blood work. And around that time, I started having new symptom after new symptom after new symptom. I went basically on this, I'll call it a wild goose chase for about 10 to 12 years. I ended up developing all of these new symptoms all the time. I would have pain from the tips of my toes to the top of my head. Anywhere on my body, I experienced pain. I experienced pain on my skin. I experienced pain in my muscle. I experienced pain in my joints. Felt like pain in my bones, stabbing pains, pinching pains, just any kind of pain. I just always had some new symptom, and I had seen so many different specialists ruling out things and getting second, third opinions, and having a lot of specialists really look at me like I was making up my story about why and how I could be in so much pain, because pretty much most of my tests would come back completely normal, completely fine. And I knew what I was experiencing was not in my head. These were very real pains. And there were some days where it was so painful that I actually couldn't function. Like as a normal person my age, some days I had trouble even just getting myself dressed because I just was in so much pain. And I did luckily have a really great primary doctor at that time, and he believed what I was saying and had a hunch that it was certain things. So when I would go to these other specialists and I would have these tests done, I would get so frustrated because my tests just kept coming back normal. The only thing that I could really get a diagnosis for was digestive issues, but those didn't explain the overall chronic pain that I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. A rheumatologist ended up suggesting that perhaps I had a particular autoimmune disease. So I kind of went around for a few years kind of identifying with that label, and there really was no treatment for it, if that was my actual diagnosis. And I kind of just stuck with that diagnosis for a while, and I really just was like, okay, if this is the situation, then I will just do my best to manage my symptoms myself, because that's really all I can do since there's not really any treatment for it. And I definitely am not interested on being on any types of pain medications or anything like that. So I really just kind of at that point accepted, okay, maybe I have this. And if that's the case, then I'm just gonna do my best to not let my symptoms overturn my life and just do the best that I can. And that's when I started doing intuitive healing on myself. So I started just managing the symptoms myself and my pain myself as best as I could. And I also was aware that stress definitely did make things worse. Depression definitely did make my symptoms worse. And I would get so upset dealing with certain situations. Usually it followed with me kind of feeling literally like crippled to my room and really not being able to do anything. And so when I moved to a different state a couple years ago, and I had access to much better healthcare system, better doctors, and that kind of thing, I went for one final opinion on the specific diagnosis. So I went to this particular specialist and they explained to me very clearly, no, you do not have blank blank. And I'm like, okay. At that point, I can't even tell you how many tests I've had, how many specialists I've been to, how many different types of medications I had been put on throughout all the years, even taking things like antidepressants to combat pain that I was feeling. I had basically been like a walking guinea pig for years because they just didn't know what the F was going on with me, and it was just always something different and really nothing that had a definitive explanation other than like, yeah, I was experiencing chronic pain, but it's really undiagnosable. So once I had finally gotten that final opinion of being like, you don't have this, you know, you just have undiagnosed chronic pain. And I was just like, okay, I have been on this journey so long, and I have been doing my best managing my symptoms myself at this for this long, without, you know, medications. Because at some point along in my journey, I was like, okay, you know what, I don't want to try any more medications to mask my symptoms. It was definitely pretty apparent also once I started going to therapy that a lot of my pain was directly linked to my stress, like I had mentioned. So I said all of that to say that on my journey, I had some light bulbs go off. And now I had mentioned that my childhood, I was not sick very often, a handful of times. But there's a flip side to that, and that is for majority of my life, I was experiencing pretty intense levels of abuse. I was abused for a very long time, many parts of my life on an everyday basis. So that lasted for a very long time, and it lasted until I was just about 18, and that is when I had hit a crossroad in my life. I hit a fork in a road where I was either gonna end my life or I was gonna stop what was happening. And I stopped what was happening. And then shortly after, I got sick. And so what I realized, what actually had been happening with me, well, one thing is that there's lots of studies that have been done that people who develop chronic pain or even autoimmune diseases or things like that, things of that nature, a lot of it can often be traced to childhood trauma. And like I mentioned, I experienced, without getting into details, I experienced, I would say, more on the severe end of that spectrum. And the reason why I'm sharing this in particular is because what I realized what was happening with me while I was a child was I, out of survival, was disconnecting from my body. So my experiences were so traumatic and they were so severe that I started to disassociate from my body. And at that time, that was my means of survival. That was how I could really live two lives, essentially. Once I started going to therapy a few years ago, which was the catalyst in my spiritual journey and made the light bulbs go off, because all these years I didn't know that I had PTSD. I had PTSD from abuse, and I also had PTSD from leaving a 10-year relationship, and those things that I never dealt with, the childhood experience in particular, it all just fell like dominoes after I left my 10-year relationship and then had PTSD from that. It just all compiled on top of each other. So then once I started going to therapy and I was given a diagnosis of having post-traumatic stress disorder, I was able to start to understand myself and able to understand why I was at where I was at in my life, why I reacted to situations the way that I did, and why I was having issues that I was having, all linked to trauma. Ever since I was a child, I had a very unhealthy relationship with my body, and that part of it was being a young adolescent girl, and a lot of that was from the abuse I was experiencing. I attached so much shame and guilt and disgust with my body that I really, at a very young age, started having body dysmorphia. How I looked at myself in the mirror was not really an accurate representation of what I actually looked like. The older I got, I also just didn't want to see myself in a sexual way. So in so many ways and in so many layers, I detached myself from my body. I was really not in tune with my body because I didn't want to be in tune with my body. To be in tune with my body, with what I was experiencing, was too much for me. It was unbearable. And at the time, it just really was not a viable option for my emotional ability to physically survive. When I began my healing journey, my spiritual journey, and I began meditating, I started to really be aware of not just all the pain that my body was in, because I was aware of that, but it's like my body started screaming at me to pay attention to it, because I was being present in my body for the first time in probably my whole life. When I sat down and began meditating, my body was so itchy that I didn't want to be in my body. And it was very challenging in the beginning. And this really lasted for about a year. And I had to really practice over and over of not trying to leave my body. And this was something that I even noticed still followed me even in my work scenario in present day, where sometimes I'll be in such stressful situations that I don't want to be in, that I literally can feel myself wanting to separate from my body. And I have to tell myself, like, no, you're in this right now and you're safe and this and that. Basically, what was happening with me in my childhood when I was having these physical experiences of trauma, I can look back at it and I can see that these were moments where my soul fragmented, where I just wanted to leave my body, where I didn't want a relationship with my body, where I hated my body, I was disgusted with my body, and I just didn't want to be me. And for a long time, I just didn't even want to be alive. To be alive was to experience pain that often felt endless. I know that was kind of all over the place, but I hope you can understand where my traumas had me out of touch with my body for survival. And then once I made a decision for that to stop is when my body, through my immune system, through pain, my body for the first time in my life was like, hey, listen to me. I am in so much pain. We have gone through so many traumatic experiences together, and it's all stored in my body, in my womb. Will you please listen to me? And for a long time, to be honest, I did not want to listen to my body, and I really didn't. And I just wanted someone to tell me that something was wrong with me. For some reason, being told that something was wrong with me was gonna validate my experience as what I identified at the time as being a victim of my experiences of my life. The moment that I told myself, you know what, whatever this is, I accept this and I'm going to manage this the best that I can to my ability, and started tuning into my body, was when I started taking control of my body, ownership of my body for the first time, which was not foolproof at all. But fast forward to today, I would say right now I'm really, for the first time, having a real relationship with my body. And I make it my intention every day to communicate with my body, to check in with my body, because my divinity, is in this physical form, and it's a co-creation. It can be a symbiotic relationship. And if I want to be my best, most optimal self, I need to learn how to work with my body, and that includes listening to it when it's in pain and seeing why. What's the root of that and what's going on? The body is an intelligent vessel all on its own. It's something that can be communicated with. And so much of my journey, where I'm at right now, is taking back ownership of my body and just changing the narrative and how I view myself, how I talk to myself. I will make future videos discussing more in depth about intuitive healing, my experiences, and how I've personally changed my relationship with my body. But I just really wanted to share this because it's not something that a lot of people talk about, and which is understandable. I sure as hell never thought I'd be sharing this with, you know, people on the internet, but I feel like it's important at this part of my journey, all the things that I've made it through, for me to share my experiences, as uncomfortable as they may be. Of course, this is not anything to replace any medical information or anything like that. I'm just simply sharing my experience and just giving you guys a story, and do with that what you will, but use your own discretion and your own discernment, and seeking medical advice where you feel that you need to. And if you made it through this entire video, which I know is really long, but it's so hard to condense your life experience with something so heavy in such a coded way, in a short period of time, but I did my best. But if you've made it all the way this far, go ahead and leave me an octopus emoji so that I know that you made it till the end. And thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. This, I'm sure, was not an easy topic to really listen to. It's not a pleasant topic, but so much of the spiritual journey of life, and so many of the transformative initiations come through some really dark, intense shit. I just want to be that one person that's like, hey, I've been through some fucked up shit too, and I'm right here with you, and we're doing the best we can, and we're gonna get through this, and we can be alchemists, and we can be examples of what another option or another route is to go down, that you don't have to repeat things that others have. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story today. I really appreciate it. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.